In this video, we're going to make some cheap, realistic modular rivers for your wargaming table. Now, when I say the cheapest in the title, obviously, you could just get some cardboard, paint it blue and green and whatever you can call that a day. But no, we're going to actually make some more realistic methods of building some modular rivers, and the way we're going to do that is partly use, and you've probably seen this video because it has like over 1.5 million views, we're going to use Mark Quinn of Sweden's method of using toilet paper and gloss varnish, but we're going to convert that into a modular river system, which I think looks pretty decent, and I'll show you how to make it right now. Now, the first thing we're going to need here is a basing material. Now, I'm going to be using vinyl tile because it's very cheap and you can get 3 or 4 sheets of it for about £1 in the UK, and I believe you can probably get the same for $1 in the US. It's not the best basing material, so if you can get something like EPVC or MDF, then do use that instead. There's 2 key things to consider when we are measuring out our rivers, and that is how long we want them. So in my case, I'm doing this for like a kill team board, which is 22 inches by 30 inches, which is a little bit awkward, but you need to keep that in mind. So for example, I'm actually going to do like a 10-inch piece so I can make it go straight across the board. The next thing to consider is actually the width of the river. So in my case, I'm going to go with 5 inches wide with a 1-inch banking on either side. So it's 3 inches in terms of the actual river and then 1 inch either side. Now, I just measure it out, but you could, if you wanted, use some sort of jig. The first piece I'm going to make is a 12-inch section, and the vinyl tile itself is 12 inches. So all I do is I line this up in a corner and I measure 1 inch away, then I measure 3 inches beyond that, and then 1 inch beyond that, and then I simply rotate the vinyl tile and do it on the other side. Now here, basically my river itself is going to be perfectly straight so that it doesn't mess up with any of my measurements for like how long I want the river. However, the actual embanking and the way that the river goes doesn't have to be a perfectly straight line. If anything, that would look a little bit unnatural. So while the piece is perfectly straight, the embankings and stuff like that bend and weave. As long as your end pieces and your start pieces are the exact same measurements, everything should line up and be modularly fine. So the straights are actually relatively simple. In my case, I'm actually going to do 6 inches, 10 inches and 12 inches. If there's any difficulty in this, it only comes with the curves. Now, one of the reasons that I did my rivers 5 inches wide in total is so that when I did the curve, I could make it so that it basically extended my river 6 inches vertically, and 6 inches is essentially the length that I'm mainly working with. So for the curve, I go to a corner of the vinyl tile and I measure away from that corner 1 inch on either side, and that's actually just going to be empty space, because from that 1 inch I'm then going to measure a further inch, which is actually going to be where the embanking is, then 3 inches and then 1 inch, and I'm going to do that both across and up. And then it's just a case of joining the dots, which is relatively simple. You can do it as wavy as you like. So that's the 90-degree turn. It's slightly more complicated for the 45-degree pieces, in the sense that it's exactly the same, apart from what you really need to do is draw a line from the corner at a 45-degree angle. Now the vinyl tile is actually 12 by 12, so you can literally just draw a line from one corner to the other and you'll have your 45-degree angle, or you might need to use a protractor. And then on that diagonal line, you need to measure inwards again the 1 inch, then another further inch where your embanking will be, then 3 inches, and then a further inch. And you need to make sure that basically your line is going to pass through those connecting points, because that's where we're going to cut, and that's how we're going to have a perfectly fine 45-degree angle. If you're using vinyl tile, you can simply cut out your shapes with a pair of scissors. Do keep in mind that you'll get a little bit of stickiness on the scissors due to the self-adhesive of the vinyl tile. And then for the embanking, I'm going to be using corrugated cardboard. I would highly recommend using something better like XPS foam or foam board, but we're going with the cheapest as we can do here, and we're going to be doing corrugated card. So what I do is I take the edge of my cut out vinyl tile and I basically trace that line onto some cardboard, then I measure it inwards an inch, because this is going to be the embanking. And essentially I just retrace the line 1 inch away from the previous line, cut that out, and then bevel the edges. Now I do that for the curves as well. You don't necessarily need as much cardboard as you think for the curves, because you can do it, you can sneak it in basically. Once you've cut out your card, then you bevel the edges. With corrugated card, it's not particularly looking great because you're going to have the corrugation showing, but it is what it is. You do that for all of your pieces, of course. To glue on your bankings to the vinyl tile, make sure you take off the paper because that's completely redundant at this point, and you can just glue it on with PVA. I would maybe recommend super glue or hot glue if you have it, as I did have a bit of a problem with some of this peeling away. And then we come to the Marquand of Sweden method of getting the texture onto the base of this river. Now what I would personally do here is get some non-stick paper, because this is going to get very messy, and then you put your river on the non-stick paper, of course. And now I cover the whole thing in PVA, including the bankings. Now what I would maybe recommend here is maybe a little tiny dab of super glue on the ends of the river, simply to hold the tissue down and in place, because I did have a minor problem myself with some of it peeling, but you might not have that issue. So I cover the whole thing in PVA, and then I mix together some PVA and some water, let's say like a 50-50 mixture, but really just a sort of wet amount of PVA will be fine. The more wet it is, the longer it will take to dry. Once you've got your mixture together, you can start adding on your toilet paper or toilet tissue or kitchen towel, whatever it is you're using, onto the river. You can do this in just individual sheets and let it overlap, because once you've got it all covered, you're going to take your brush, dip it into your mixture, and then you're simply going to stipple away at it. And that stippling will generally get rid of the lines where they overlap or any texture that was on your toilet paper. Once you're happy with your first layer, then I'm going to cover the whole thing again in PVA and do the same thing, add another layer of tissue and then stipple away at that. I would maybe go up to 3 layers, but it's completely up to you. Once you've actually got your texture and you're happy with it before it dries, you can either take off your river piece and sort of just peel away the edges. Because it's all wet, it'll peel away very easily. Or you can do what I did, which is just let the whole thing dry on the baking paper and then cut it out around the vinyl tile. Either way is fine. It could take quite a while to dry, maybe at least 24 hours. I would maybe recommend 48 hours. If it's a nice sunny day, you could maybe put them outside for a couple of hours. Once it's all dry, I'm going to add sand to the banking with just some PVA and sand. Then I'm going to paint the whole thing brown. If you're going to add stones to your river, I would recommend you do that in the painting step. And then it comes to the middle of the river. Now, I don't want to get into his water blue and all that kind of stuff, but I'm going to go with the browny, bluey, turquoisey colour for the river. The only thing you really need to ensure is that your first layer is pretty dark, and then while it's wet, ideally, you want to try and mix up like a lighter colour of this sort of browny, turquoisey colour, and then sort of just paint it on towards the edges. You don't have to be super smooth here. It doesn't have to be a pure wet blend. You could dry brush it if you wanted. It's pretty easy to do as long as you're relatively quick. It's basically a dark colour in the middle of the river going progressively lighter towards the end. It's not perfect because rivers aren't necessarily blue, but it'll do. That rhymed. Once you're happy with the colour of it, I'm going to put some flocking on the sides of my embankment. This is just any woodland scenic flocks, but any flock will do. And then I seal that flocking with some watered down PVA because I want to do that before I add the gloss effect. And then adding the gloss is pretty easy. The gloss in this case is some quick drying gloss I got off Amazon for like £5. You can get very small tubs of it very cheaply. In fact, I have a very small tub, I think it's like 250ml, and I must have used maybe 50 to 100ml of it, if that. And all you're going to do is paint a nice thin layer of it on your river and watch it dry. Well, don't watch it, it'll be boring. And then once it's dry, you simply paint another layer on. I did maybe 3 layers. If you go higher, you do run the risk of it sort of like greying over. That happened to me with PVA in the past. I don't know if this clear gloss would do that. I personally tried to have like a banking crossing, but what I did is I put sand in the middle of the river, but I never did a corresponding layer of the banking on either side, so it looked stupid, so I just ignored that. And where I had done the stones, I tried to add some sort of like rapids using some white paint that I saw on like a Luke Towing video, but mine looked awful, so I think I just sort of gave up on that. But that's pretty much it. Before we look at the slightly prettier shots, if you did enjoy this video or any of my videos, please do consider supporting me on Patreon. I would really very much appreciate it. Let's have a look at the slightly nicer pictures. Now, I think it's obvious if you're going to use resin, that is a standard way of getting like realistic rivers, then you will end up with a better result, but resin is more expensive than this. This was literally a vinyl tile, cardboard and a gloss varnish. You can't really ask more when you're using those cheap materials. Using the Marquand of Sweden's method using toilet paper adds those nice little undulations and actually makes it look like a river, so I quite like that. To do that with resin, what you would normally do is you would do like a resin pour, and then in certain places you would go back on with, say, maybe like Mod Podge and sort of stipple it on. Here you sort of don't have to do that. All you need to do is use a toilet tissue method, stipple that, paint it, and then add the gloss, and you sort of have like the nice combination of the two. Ultimately, I think it looks completely fine. It's very cheap. Technically, they're not the most realistic rivers you can get, and they're probably not the cheapest. You could always paint cardboard, as I said at the start. But really, I think for the like price to effort ratio, these are fantastic. It's cardboard, vinyl tile, gloss varnish, everything there you can get probably for like £5. So I'm pretty happy with the result. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Like and subscribe. Consider supporting me on Patreon if this is something you like to see. Have a most beautiful day. Goodbye.